Hello, this is Dr. Patrick Gentempo, and I'm here in Las Vegas at Parker Seminars in Las Vegas. Great event, great experience, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to sit and have a conversation that I know you're going to find extraordinarily stimulating and will add a lot of value to your perception of chiropractic and hopefully some value that you'll put on the ground tomorrow from what you learned here in your practice. With a chiropractor that I've known of for a lot of years, but in the most recent year, especially working on the movie Doctored, I've gotten to know him much more personally, and I couldn't be more happy than to be here with him right now, and that's Dr. Craig Buhler. So Craig, thanks for taking some time with me here today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. So let's start maybe back at the beginning, I think is the best bet. What got you started in chiropractic? And maybe I'll ask this question first. How many years of practice now?
36.
Wow, 36 years of practice. Boy, you're well preserved. You look good.
Well, you know, all those preservatives in the food keep me in good shape.
So what got you started?
I ran track for the University of Utah, and I sustained an injury to my foot. And I tried all the different training techniques with taping, and you know, each year, I just lived with it. I'd train to a certain level, and I'd break down, so I'd have to lay off for a few weeks, and I'd train, and it was that way for 3 years. During the WAC outdoor time trials, I ran my fastest race. But when I finished, I was in so much pain I could hardly walk.
Wow.
And I couldn't run the mile relay, so the coach was quite upset. And I lost my scholarship, and so I dropped out of school.
Wow.
And I went to the team doctor. They injected me with cortisone, and it felt like I had mush in my joint, and it didn't help. So everything I tried didn't work. And 2 years later, at the recommendation of a friend, I went to a chiropractor for the first time for headaches, because I'd had them my whole life. And I grew up like so many of us do, with thinking chiropractors were dangerous and they were quacks. And so I thought, well, nothing else has worked. I'm going to try this. So I went to the chiropractor. He did a great case history, did an exam like no one had ever done, took x-rays, brought me back the next day for a report. And he sat me down and explained to me about my spine and about, you know, why I had headaches, and outlined a care program. And I remember the first time he adjusted me, he adjusted my foot, and I got off the table pain-free for the first time in 5 years.
Wow.
I had sprained an ankle early on, and that had never been balanced. And so when I'd run the turns, I ran the quarter mile, and those turns, there's so much torque on that inside foot that I just really stressed the talocalcaneal articulation, and nobody understood that. I remember going to an orthopedist for Utah Stars, which was an ABA team at the time. I think they lasted about 2 years. And he took x-rays, and he examined me, and he says, well, he said, I can't find anything wrong with you. But I said, you know what, I really would like to see how fast I could run, because I would like to try for the Olympics. And he said, well, gee, if you're that good, he says, I could go in and put wires and screws in the joints and stabilize those joints. And he said, you might be able to do that. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is the most ridiculous idea. I couldn't even get my brain around it. That somehow he couldn't tell me what was wrong with me, but he was going to improve my joint function by putting wires and screws in. And that's really when I started seeking out alternatives. So when I got off the table and I was pain-free, I was just shocked.
All right.
Well, it took him about 7 or 8 weeks of regular care before my headaches finally subsided. The time I was supposed to take over my dad's meatpacking plant. And I remember work one day, I was out running cattle up for slaughter, and it just hit me. This cow looked at me in the eyes. It was the weirdest experience. It looked at me in the eyes, and it hit me that this was not what I was born to be. And so at that moment, I just turned it over to God. I says, okay, you do with me what you will. And it's the weirdest thing. It was almost like God says, okay, it's about time you asked the right question.
Right.
He took me by the shoulder and he says, hang on, because it's going to be a heck of a ride.
Right.
And that's when I was exposed to chiropractic. And so as I sit in the waiting room, I'm reading material about chiropractic. And I look at the educational requirements and the education for chiropractor. And I had talked to my medical doctor about chiropractic, and they told me, well, it's a 6-month mail order course, and any idiot can become a chiropractor. And I'm reading this material and think, well, this has got to be just recent. So I talked to my chiropractor about the education of a chiropractor. He says, well, it's been that way for 20, 25 years.
Right.
And then I got angry because I realized I'd been lied to and what it had cost me and lost potential and opportunity. And so as I started looking more into it, I realized it's almost like that spirit said, this is what you're here to do.
Right.
And so
You decided to go to chiropractic.
I decided to go to chiropractic college. And through a series of fluky events, that, there were those times during this process where I felt victimized by certain circumstances, but when I look back, it was perfect because it put me in Western States Chiropractic College, where I met Dr. Beardall, Alan Beardall,
Right.
who was my mentor.
Right.
And that was through a series of fluky events. And he took a liking to me. So I'd go out to his office after school and on Fridays and Saturdays, and I got a great education. It was during the time he was developing his technique called clinical kinesiology. Of course, at school, kinesiology was seen as this hocus-pocus procedure, and at Western States, we got no philosophy. It was just very scientific. And
Who did Beardall learn from?
he learned from Gonstead, Toughness. I mean, he studied with all the greats.
Right.
Because he treated a lot of elite runners, because he was ranked national distance runner himself.
I didn't know that about Beardall.
Yeah, he in fact tried out for the Olympic team and didn't make it when he
Wow.
was younger. And so he realized that.
So he was there with Toughness and Gonstead and all the big boys back in the Palmer days. Yeah. Yeah.
And he looked at those techniques and he used them and he saw great results, but there were also patients that he didn't get results with, and he kept asking the why question: why aren't they responding? And that's what motivated him to learn new techniques and try to expand his understanding. And then he learned about George Goodhart's work,
Right.
applied kinesiology, and that opened up a world of opportunity for him because now he had a tool that he could assess athletic performance,
Right.
pre and post. And so he started integrating systems. And at the time, Goodhart had defined two reflexes, vascular lymphatic point, for about 65 muscles. And of course, Goodhart continued to look at new systems and adding cranial work and nutritionals and organ gland systems. And Alan, because he treated so many athletes, found that it was limited because George had only defined reflexes for a small amount of muscles. And Alan felt like, well, if the reflexes for the sartorius or the soleus are important, they're important for all the muscles. And he kept after Goodhart to get the reflexes defined, and Goodhart never did. He was on to other things. So Alan decided he was going to have to do it. So he launched into this deep clinical research project, studied the anatomy, the old anatomy textbooks, and really listened to his patients. So he'd have a patient come in, a runner, with knee pain, and Alan would treat it with the normal techniques that he had developed with AK. The athlete would feel great off the table, but as soon as they got out 2 or 3 miles, the pain would come back. Or a basketball player that would play and then he'd get pain. So the athlete would come in and Alan would say, okay, show me what position caused you pain, because Alan would test the muscle that he treated, it was still functional. So the athlete would get into a partial squat with rotation. He said, that's what causes my pain. So Alan put him on the table and put him in that position and challenged the muscle through that plane of motion. It was weak, aberrant, and painful. And it was confusing to Alan because he said, what muscle is responsible for that movement? Because it didn't fit the standard kinesiology processes.
Right.
So then he went to the old anatomy textbooks, and he discovered that there were divisions to those muscles.
Right.
And so as time went on, new editors came on board, and they wanted to simplify anatomy for the student to make it easier to learn. They removed the divisions, which helped students study and learn better, but you lost the detail of function.
Right.
And so that was the first time that he realized, you know what, there are divisions to these muscles. And so, go ahead.
When he was, because looking at the school he came from, interesting that foundation, obviously, Gonstead, Toughness, which is steeped in, pretty focused on the spine, subluxation, etc. good heart, muscle testing and kind of going into those systems of analysis on learning what's going on with the nervous system and the body and the relationship between the two.
Right.
And then got into the extremity side of things. So he kind of knitted all these things together into, a systematized approach towards working. Because I'm imagining when he's working on these athletes or basketball players, he's adjusting their spine, also doing the stuff
yeah.
he knew, but then also would be able to attend to what was particularly was going on in an area of stress in an extremity also.
Correct.
And that was so. And what years was Beardall doing this kind of work?
Well, I graduated in '78, and he was probably into his research in '74, 75.
So, and that was really sort of, there weren't a lot of chiropractors working on athletes back then, I don't think,
No,
were there? Yeah,
no.
so this was kind of an innovative thing he was doing.
It was.
So you basically were, his, I don't know if you say protege, but one of his prime students that
Yes.
he was teaching this to. So, and this is while you were a student?
This is while I was a student. He didn't let students come out and observe because it was just too stressful.
Right.
And for some reason, he took a liking to me and let me come out.
Wow.
So when I got into senior clinic, I had a skill set that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, wow.
So I had all my clinic hours done
Yeah,
in half the time.
wow.
And
So then you got out of school,
then I got out of school.
and did you head back to Utah then? Or
I didn't. There's 6 months out from taking your boards, and I had just missed the cutoff.
Right.
So I thought rather than stay in Utah, go back to Utah for 6 months for my boards, I would do an associate program. So I found a chiropractor in Roseburg, Oregon, redneck capital of America, so to speak, logging community, and I signed a 1-year contract.
Oh, wow.
And so I went down there with my family and started working. He would not let me use the muscle work. I had to use basic chiropractic technique. And he was a heavy adjuster. I mean, he just rattled your cage. And those loggers loved that.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a tendency to be use more finesse, more sensory
And
type of
specificity,
adjustment.
yeah.
So things went along really well for 3 or 4 months. He advertised, which nobody did at that time. And the board sent him a letter warning him that advertising was considered unethical practice. And if he didn't cease and desist, they would take action.
Wow.
Well, he felt it was
His right to
his right
advertise.
to advertise. Well, he continued to advertise. They put his license on probation.
Really?
And so my preceptorship program was canceled. I mean,
Wow.
it was like, and so this was 3
Did
weeks
he
out.
fight? I just had a curious sidebar. Did he fight it?
He did.
And did he end up winning and getting his license back?
Well, they didn't take they just put him on probation to where if he didn't, clean up his act.
I see you're saying he was, but you couldn't precept it with somebody who was on probation.
Correct.
Was the problem? I get it.
You see?
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So this is 3 weeks out from Christmas, and I'm out of a job.
Wow.
And I'm like thinking,
And you got a
why
family.
me? Yeah, I got kids. And I'm like going in my victim mode. So I moved my family back to Salt Lake. I hired an accountant to get an SBA loan, and I waited to take my boards. I took my boards in April, and in May I found out I'd passed, and I opened my practice in June.
Wow. And this is what, 75 or 76?
78.
78. Okay.
Yeah, and I leased an office space next to a chiropractor named Carl Hawkins, who was a diplomat in AK. He'd been in practice for years. And in July, he calls me and he said, Craig, he said, I've got a trainer here for a basketball team. He said, I don't want to get involved because I did work with the U of U and I'm burned out. I don't want to do that anymore. Would you be interested in talking to this guy? I said, sure. So Don Sparks, the trainer for the Utah Jazz, came in and interviewed me.
Right.
Now, they had just moved the franchise from New Orleans to Salt Lake.
I remember that. Okay.
And they were interviewing for their team doctor, internist, chiropractor, because he'd had a chiropractor in Orleans that he'd used.
Wow.
And that chiropractor knew Carl Hawkins, and that's the referral.
Wow.
So he interviewed me, and I worked on some things he'd had and helped him. And the next week he called to see if he'd bring in Adrian Dantley, who was their premier forward at the time.
Yes.
And AD came in, and AD had some issues that he'd struggled through college with, and I fixed him. And that was my beginnings with the Utah Jazz.
So this is, you talk about like the way the cards light up, the fate
Yeah.
of it, is that you learn under Brimhall, you really...
Or Beardall.
Beardall, rather.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Beardall. You get these specialized knowledge, especially dealing with these situations. And of course, you had your own issues, as an athlete younger that got resolved in chiropractic.
Right.
Then you go to a place where you can't practice, right? I'm sorry, you can't practice that technique. He only wants you to adjust the spine, but he doesn't want you to do any of the other things that you had learned.
Right.
And then it seems like a disaster. His license goes on probation. Oh my God, what a horrible thing! And you happen to set up, in a place where now, the opportunity opens up, and the Utah Jazz comes to you. Now, for you, many of you listening, and some of you are going to be younger, some are going to be veteran chiropractors, what have you. One of the things that Dr. Buhler is very well known for was being the chiropractor for the Utah Jazz and bringing a lot of high-profile attention to chiropractic through that, which we'll talk about with Neil Stockton and that whole famous thing that happened. And if you watch the movie Doctored, incidentally, if you're starting to put two and two together now, yes, he was the guy in Doctored when they did the whole thing with John Stockton and showing his injury and how he got back on the court and how he was promulgating in a positive way chiropractic. Dr. Buhler is the guy who pulled all that together. Not to mention, we'll talk about as a part of our story, that you're really the genesis of the whole documentary, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. So, but to me, it's always, here's the lesson. If you're listening, somebody who's listening to this right now, you needed to hear this. I just know that this is true. This was a time in your life when you needed to hear this. Things that seemingly were tragic or a disaster or a curveball that was thrown to you in life, when you get to look back on it, it turns out that it's this amazing blessing that puts you on a path where you needed to be. And that's so obvious to me in this particular situation. So getting back then, you worked on AD, the forward. He got great results. So now the Jazz says, we want you to come in and be our team chiropractor. Yes. So what happened from there?
Well, the medical staff wasn't too happy about that. And I think the Celtics had a chiropractor, and they were the only NBA team that had a chiropractor at the time. And I had called and talked to him. I forget his name right now. It's been so long. But he worked really quite well with the trainer. The key in all this was the trainer.
Right.
And so that was, Sparky had asked me to call him and see what kind of arrangements he had, and that's basically what we set up for the Jazz.
You modeled that, yeah.
And so I was, as a player would get hurt, Sparky would send the player into my office for care, and then I would go to the game and check players before every home game. And that's kind of how things worked. Okay. When we went to the playoffs, I traveled with the team, and I was there to take care of players' needs. The trainer loved what I did because he realized that I made his job better and easier, and the players learned to trust my skill level. And so they knew, I mean, what was really fun is when players come from college, they're used to the standard medical protocol. And then the veterans, when they come to the Jazz, they say, you need to see Buhler. And they'd hum hone around until they get hurt. And then they'd come and see Buhler. And the trainer would say, you need to see Buhler. And the trainer really is the coach for trainer injuries. I mean, he's a quarterback, so to speak. And so they'd come in with a sprained ankle or some other injury, and I would evaluate them and treat them. And they get off the table, and the pain was gone. And they get this weird look on their face, like, what just happened? And they're walking around the locker room like, is this real? And they learned that if they did get hurt, they could get fixed. They'd be playing the next day in most cases. So they rarely assessed the medical staff, which really kind of caused more problems for me because now it's like Buhler keeps players from getting proper medical care.
And that's kind of like a microcosm of what we're accused of in general. If you bring your kid to the chiropractor, they're not going to get normal pediatric care, et cetera, et cetera. So in looking at kind of just a couple of quick hits, how many years were you the Jazz chiropractor?
I was the Jazz chiropractor for 24 years.
Wow.
And I resigned when John Stockton retired. Because they brought in a new trainer who had no use for me at all. We had three trainers in my career with them. Sparky retired, and they brought in Mike Sheminsky. And Mike had no experience with chiropractors. And so that first year Mike was there, our injury rate peaked.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. The average, while you were there and taking care of the team, the average incidence of injury, I don't know if I'm naming the stat right, per season for the NBA was what?
60, well, for the Jazz was 61 player missed games.
Player missed games.
That's games missed due to an injury. was 61, and the league average was 141.
141. So you reduced it by basically 2/3 almost.
Yes.
It sounds like. So and then after you had departed.
Well, it was before I departed, because when Mike came on, it went from, I think we were at 22 the year before he came. When he came, it spiked up to, I think, 71. And then as he got used to what I could do and realized what I could do, he used me more and more. So he was there for 5 years, and the 5th year before he went to Seattle to take care of the Sonics, our player missed game due to injury rate was 11.
Wow. And the league average was 140 something.
Yes.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, okay.
And so when we got the new trainer in, he was pretty much old school medical, and he didn't use me. And so the last year I was with the team, Stockton was the only player I really treated.
Wow.
But the year he came on board, it went up to 141. The next year it went to 223, and it stayed high through that.
223.
Yeah.
You were at 11.
Yeah.
And it went to 223.
Yeah.
Did anybody kind of look and say, what changed here?
You know what? People did.
Yeah.
But management, the interesting thing is the owner, Larry Miller. After I'd been gone for 2 years, I was at a convention, and I get a phone call from Larry Miller, the owner. And he said, Craig, would you be willing to come back? Boozer had been out for half of one season with an ankle problem and the first half of the next season with a hamstring problem. Every time he'd try to come back, it'd tear again. After that happened 3 times, Larry called and said, hey, I can't afford this. Can you work with Boozer? I said, sure. So I went back, evaluated Boozer. Boozer's problem wasn't his hamstring. It was quadriceps that were shut down. We can talk about that in a minute as far as the relationship there. I had him back in 3 weeks. He didn't miss another game the rest of the season.
Wow.
And then the next year, preseason, Karolinka was struggling with back problems and ankle problems, and Larry called and he said, I can't afford to have another season like we've had. He says, would you be willing to come back and work with Andre? And I said, I would under the right circumstances. I needed to really create some clarity with the medical staff and the training staff, because it was just really stressful when I worked with Boozer. So I started working with Karolinko, I think in November that year, and the rest of the season he missed 5 games is all.
Wow.
4 to a broken thumb, which I really couldn't do anything
nothing
about.
that.
And 1 to a sprained ankle during a back-to-back game.
Wow.
So you look at all the injuries he dealt with up to that point. But at the end of that, the medical training staff made it so tough, I just said no more.
Yeah, you were done. So let's talk about that one kind of well-known event, which is I guess the Jazz are in the playoffs. Stockton sprains his ankle. I mean, it's very, you see the footage of it, and you see that thing just fold, and he's on the ground rolling around.
Which was rare to have him in that much pain.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he's tough.
He's a very tough guy. And then you had him back on the court. What, the next night was it?
No,
or
10 minutes later.
10 minutes later. So he rolled his ankle like that. 10 minutes later, he's back on the court. Now, for you, some of you might not be basketball fans, but John Stockton, is a basketball legend. He's an all-star. He's the point guard for the Jazz for all those years. Stockton
Hall of Famer.
Hall of Famer. The whole deal. And in his retirement speech, he thanked you, if I remember correctly.
He did.
So not many people do that, but he readily acknowledged Dr. Buhler's chiropractor for the service, to keep him in the game in the way they did, which added to his greatness. So that had to be gratifying. That
it was,
because you look at the psychology of this, and just in the way you're describing it. And incidentally, there's a parallel here for everybody who's listening, because you've got you're being put upon. You got people trying to put you down. You got people trying to discredit you. So here Craig is, who's doing the job. He's the results are obvious. The data is in, and he's having a major impact. And at the same time, he's got to still fight all this adversity within an organization where you're supposed to be on the same team,
right?
Not a different team. But people are posturing and what have you. But but Stockton insisted. I'm sure he was one of the guys who said, "I want this guy. I want this care for myself. I don't give a shit what anybody else says." Basically,
right.
Part of my language, and that's what kept you there. But in the end, it's it had to feel gratifying that he wasn't thanking the other staff. He was thanking you during his retirement.
It was, which didn't help my image with the medical staff or training staff.
So they became more envious, right?
More antagonistic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh wow. So it goes. Now, what's interesting, because I had you graciously took care of me when I was out in Utah, and so I got to experience what you do firsthand. And you talked about this the other day from the platform, so I want you to bring it back up. One of the things that you did as a part of your protocol with me was you toggled my upper cervical spine.
I did.
And as well as the other spinal work that you did, but you talked about how you discovered certain principles and other techniques of chiropractic at a point in your career, and it became kind of like an epiphany moment for you. So can you tell me about that?
Well, at Western States, we didn't learn about. We were exposed to toggle recoil, but it was like kind of a dirty word.
Right.
The real technique was diversified.
Right.
And so whenever I got a chance, I studied with Clay Thompson, great old guy. I mean,
I remember Clay. He's
Liam
great.
Fuhrer with Activator.
Right.
I mean, anytime I got a chance, I studied with the old timers because they and when I got into practice in Salt Lake, I went around to the old timers to learn because I picked up these jewels, that they had spent a career, and they shared these things with me, and so I started integrating it. It made me a better practitioner.
Right.
And so coming out of school, I thought I knew what chiropractic was, and Reggie Gold spoke. They wouldn't let him on campus.
At Western States.
At Western, we went to a basketball field house to hear Reggie.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, and I'm listening to this guy, and I'm thinking, this guy is crazy. He is whacked out of his mind.
And that's what the school tried to convince you, right?
Yeah. So
who was the president of Western States at the time?
Dr. McFadden at the time.
McFadden, okay, yeah.
But Western States is a very broad scope school. I mean, we learned to do minor surgery and proctology and OB/GYN and all the chiropractic stuff that we should all know, right? That makes such a huge difference for people's health. So anyway, I just tried to learn everything I could, and then with Beardall's work,
tell me about Reggie for a second. So finish that. Just I want you to finish out. So you went and you're watching this guy, and you say, this guy's crazy.
He's like an evangelistic. I was like in a born again Christian type setting with this crazy man walking back and forth on the stage saying it's about innate, and I'm what's innate?
Right.
Oh my gosh, it was quite an experience.
So leaving there, did it have any effect on you at all, or?
I thought I'm not getting anywhere near that kind of chiropractic.
Right.
That's crazy. I'm scientifically based.
Right.
I'm doing the physical therapy stuff and all that stuff that's been quantified, and it was amazing. But so I got into practice, and I used Beardall's work, which is a real advantage for me. But I remember, you tell patients, you do x-rays, you find they had a reverse cervical curve and all these distortions, you'd mark the vertebra and get their listings and stuff. Say, okay, we're going to put you on a program and we're going to correct this for you, every day for 2 weeks, 3 times a week. And I got great results. People got better. And I'm thinking, this is really cool stuff, And so after about 2 years of doing that, I had a patient that had been really, really sick, and it took me a little bit longer. It took me about 6 months to get her better. And I put her on maintenance care for a month, and I had her come in every month, and she still did great. I thought one day, this is about a year later, I'm going to post her x-rays and see how because obviously her spine's going to be normal and the curves back to normal. I x-rayed her, and I superimposed her post on her pre, absolutely no change. She still had a military neck. The imbalances were still there. And I felt like I had just sold her a bill of goods. And I felt betrayed by my training. But then I thought, how could she feel so good? And yet I see no change in her spine.
Right.
So I called a friend of mine, Jay Kamerick, who teaches at Life once in a while, animal chiropractic now and such. And I told him how frustrated I was. He says, you need to learn Dr. Fay's work, motion palpation. It'll open up a whole new world for you. So I went and studied with Fay. That was life-changing for me because now I could feel where the restrictions were. I could determine whether I actually changed the dynamics of the spine through motion palpation or articulations of the foot or shoulder. And so my results started to improve even better. And I had a tool I could use to quantify. And during that time, I was working to develop a muscle tester to create a graphic representation of muscle function. And I developed a pneumatic system, which was a Sigmo bulb that I attached to my hand, and then I used that to muscle test. And there was a tool that came out about that same time. I think it was a myomometer that was sold at Parker. The problem was is if you applied force at different points on the sphygmobulb, you got different results.
Right.
So I discarded that, and I met a guy named Earl Van Wagner who created the Hogan FET instrument, which was marketed at Parker, and then JTech took parts of that and developed theirs. So we had a tool that we could quantify muscle function, comparing function or strength or against time. So we had the XY axis.
Right.
So now I could actually see pre and post. So my career went along fine for that, and then I got really frustrated because I'd hear Sigafus at Parker and different events talking about miracles. And all these so-called straight chiropractors talking about miracles. And I'd go to friends' offices that practice straight chiropractic, and they were busy, and they were successful, and they were like happy. I remember there's a friend of mine, Jim Van Sluten in Salt Lake. He's like Tigger on speed. He's like so principled and so turned on to chiropractic. He just, from 7 o'clock until 7 o'clock. And he's just like, he's got more energy at the end of the day than before, you know? Hey, what's wrong with this picture? All these straight chiropractors are like successful and happy and getting great results, and yet all these guys that are like scientifically based are struggling in practice. And I was like, wait a minute. So I called Jay Kamerick again, and I said, I'm frustrated. What do I do? He said, you need to go to ADIO. Well, what's ADIO? He said, well, it's a program where you learn about chiropractic. Well, I said, I already know about chiropractic. He says, no, you don't. I said, okay, Jay, I'm coming. So I went to, was it South Carolina or North Carolina? Somewhere.
Probably Spartanburg, to Sherman.
And I went to ADIO.
And
I remember sitting there listening to Dr. Kale and Dr. Epstein, Donnie Epstein, Sigafus, Romberg. And these guys are saying the same thing, miracles in your office every day. And I was seeing miracles once in a while, but not every day. And so I'm like thoroughly intrigued. So that was the first night I stayed with Jay and his wife. And after we had dinner, he said, you guys need a clear out. Well, what's a clear out? Well, it's network, this Donnie Epstein's work, and it's really a really neat work. And so I said, okay. So we laid on the table, and he turned the music on, and he started working with me. And I don't know whether you've seen Donnie's work, but
Donnie's
my gosh,
worked on me several times.
So I'm laying there, and he's putting these points, and I'm thinking, this is really relaxing, but I don't know what he's doing. And then I'd been on the table for probably 10, 15 minutes, and he had his wife come in and help him, and they did put me in some kind of weird position and had me resist it just for a few minutes, and then they released it. My body went into the most amazing psychosomatic wave that, I mean, I'm laying on the table, my abdominal muscles are in contraction, I'm laying there thinking, what in the heck is going on? I'm not controlling this, and I start laughing.
Wow.
I'm thinking, this is bizarre.
I've had the same experience,
So at the end of it, then he did my wife. And the next day is when I listened to Donnie speak. And he's talking about concepts that were so foreign to me. But I thought, you know what? Innately, I knew he knew something that was really powerful. And so I signed up for his classes. And I took his certification course, and I went to a gate. And you
went to a gate, so you got to see the whole. You saw the whole deal. That's a wild scene, isn't it?
It is, but powerful. And and Donnie taught me how to approach people. The co-concept between a meningeal subluxation pattern and osseous opened up another world of understanding. You now realize, okay, this is why when I adjust certain patients, it hurts them, and others, it's like life-changing. But I had to know how to toggle in order to do Donnie's work. And so he suggested I study with Kale. So I studied with Dr. Kale and learned about chiropractic and toggle recoil.
Wow.
I mean, it was like...
You always got to the right people.
I did.
If you're going to learn network, Donnie's the guy. If you're going to learn toggle, Kale, he's the guy, then you'll need chest, toggler. That's...
But when you think about it, if we look at all of our careers, haven't we all been guided innately? I mean, if we're conscious... If we're not unconscious, innate tends to wake us up enough to say, hey, wake up, take a look at this. Or we get stuck.
So how many years into your career did what year was it approximately
that was 18 years into my career.
Wow, so you're 18 years in and then discover this whole new world.
And at that point, I was ready to quit.
Wow.
because I was so frustrated. I felt like I was selling people a bill of goods when it came to the spine, you
Right.
know?
And then after you, so right then you discover this whole new world.
Yes,
It lights you up, and off you go again.
I do. I do. So I came back from Kale's seminar, and I put all my muscle work on the shelf, and I practiced exclusively straight chiropractic for almost a year. My practice doubled.
Wow.
People came in with conditions that I never would have dreamed. People come in with all these weird conditions, and they'd want, "Can you help me?" And initially I'd think, "There's no way on God's green earth I can help this." But intuitively I thought, well, I know you're going to be better off if your nervous system is clear.
Right.
And that's another thing that Donnie taught me was, are you clear? Are you creating a clarity of the central nervous system?
Right.
Or are you just merely popping bones?
Right.
And so conditions that I never would have dreamed possible got better. I mean, it was like,
So you started
Mind-boggling.
seeing the miracles.
The
that
miracles.
everybody else was talking about.
I mean, really, it's like if chiropractors knew how powerful this was,
Yeah.
every chiropractor in the country would be so busy they couldn't handle it all.
Right.
It's not about promoting necessarily, it's about producing the results and living from the vision and owning it internally.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so I realized I couldn't very well tell John Stockton, look, you sprain an ankle, I'll toggle your atlas.
Right.
And so I integrated the muscle work into the upper cervical. And what I discovered was, and this was a real eye-opener for me, for 18 years I had been adjusting the atlas and axis, at least what I thought I was, but I wasn't correcting subluxation.
Right.
There's a difference between manipulating the spine and correcting a subluxation.
Right.
And I discovered that when you look at the essence of what a subluxation is, which is compromising the central nervous system, the only place in the spine that's possible is atlas axis occiput.
Right.
Everything below that is proprioceptive based. So when you adjust the rest of the segments, you're not impacting directly the central nervous system. You're impacting the proprioceptive system, which in turn affects the
Right.
central nervous system. And
But it's more indirect than the upper cervical
yeah,
spine.
yeah. And so I realized I had sent all these patients through the years out of my office still subluxated.
Wow. Wow. Now, what's interesting is that was a bad word at Western States, probably.
It was,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
back then. And now it's coming into this becoming kind of the intention of what you're doing every day, saying we
Yeah.
have to correct these
Yes, it is.
subluxations. And I think also, and I agree with you, I think the Epstein model of neurospinal integrity and looking at the dural implications is a real key to all of that.
It is.
So wow, what a journey! I mean, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
So now you've kind of put this together. You start to see this different experience. You start, I guess, having fun in practice again. Certainly, you're a lot busier, and you're seeing conditions clear up that you wouldn't have even probably accepted before.
Correct.
So where does it go from there?
Well, it's interesting to me because I thought about all the stuff that I'd done before, you know, with the muscle testing, and I would find stresses on kidneys or stresses on the adrenals or pancreas. And I realized once I learned about chiropractic that the neural pathways from the Houston control, as Kale would talk about,
Right.
that the subluxation was compromising the neural pathway to the kidney, then I'm going to find kidney stress. So because I adjusted the spine thinking that I was correcting it, in reality I wasn't. Now I'm left with kidney stress caused from the subluxations not corrected in the cervicals.
Right.
So now I'm doing nutritionals, I'm doing acupuncture, I'm doing all these things to try to support the kidney,
Right.
that all it needs is the neural pathway reduced.
Right.
And so I realized that if I can make sure that I have taken the stress off the brainstem, now I've got a nervous system that's more clear.
Yes.
Now what? So we talk about innate intelligence. What's the language of innate? And in my world, it's symptoms.
Yes.
Okay? So it's restriction through motion because of muscle inhibition or muscle facilitation.
Right.
It's reflex points that are acute, that relate to specific tissues in the body. The body was organized in such an amazing way
Right.
that it was designed with external systems to indicate internal imbalances.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
And so we have this innate communication with patients. So the patient comes in with a whole slew of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we're scientifically based, we diagnose that,
Right.
which gives them a label.
Right.
But now what? Okay, now what?
Now they become the label.
Now you become the label,
Right.
and it locks it into your neurology,
Right.
and now you're a victim of it.
Yes.
So I go beyond that into saying, okay, this is your diagnosis, but why is that there?
Mhm.
There's a core cause here.
Right.
Let's see if we can define why.
Mhm.
And then we let the body guide the process.
Right. Now that's obviously makes a lot of sense, and you've become, I think, in large respect, what Beardall was, in the sense that you have learned from a lot of different people, and now you've collected all this knowledge, experience, your journey, all the things you've been through, and you've organized your own approach and technique based on everything that you've learned and everything you've experienced.
Yes.
Do you have a name for the technique?
We've branded it as an advanced muscle integration technique,
Got it.
but it's founded in Beardall's work. Now, Beardall was killed in an auto accident in London or in England some 29 years ago.
Yeah, it was tragic.
And I've just continued to work it and expand it and refine it.
Mm-hmm.
And his brand was clinical kinesiology, not to be confused with AK, and that was a really frustration for him that the AK circles really didn't embrace. They thought that he was trying to upstage George, which he wasn't.
Right.
But when you talk in terms of muscle testing, most people just roll their eyes and say, yeah, I've already tried that, that's hocus pocus.
Mm-hmm.
We have come to a level of objectivity that defines muscle function. It's not about testing muscles for strength. It's about testing the neuroproprioceptive response ability of a muscle to an applied force over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just taken it to a different level. And I wanted people to say, oh, advanced muscle integration technique, I've never heard of that before. I didn't want people's minds, past experience, to prejudice them looking at the system.
Right.
Because it's a different system. It's a very elegant approach to assessment, diagnosis, and treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel important that you diagnose the source of the problem.
Right.
Not the disease, but the source of the problem. Because once you define the source, then you say, okay, what tool is best suited to correct that?
Right.
And what we found is that if all the essential components essential for healing are available, the body's able to cure anything, or heal, not cure, but heal. That cure thing just drives me nuts, but heal and rebalance the body.
Now, what's interesting, and I'm going to say one other thing here before we dig into the technique a little bit more. You also made another choice not that long ago where your practice is 100% cash now. You've gotten completely off of insurance.
It is.
Talk to me about that.
Okay, when I was having marital problems at a time in my life, and my wife felt like we needed to move to Oregon to kind of salvage our marriage. And so I sold my practice in Salt Lake. I told the Jazz that I was going to be moving. We sold our home, everything, and the Jazz freaked, specifically Stockton and some of the other players. So Larry Miller approached me and said, we can't afford to lose your services. Would you be willing to stay on? I said, well, I can't very well stay on and work and build a practice in Oregon. You'd have to pay me. He said, how much? I told him. He said, fine. I'm going to need a home and a car. Fine. So I went to work full-time for the Jazz.
Right.
And so I commuted from Portland when they went on the road, I would go back to Portland. And that lasted a couple of years before we got divorced. So I moved back to Utah. And so I sold my practice and moved. And so I vowed that I would never do insurance again.
And is that because of the frustration of dealing with
Just the frustration. Yeah. It's like I felt captive of this system that I wasn't congruent with what I'm about.
Right.
And I felt like I was a slave to this system. I had to have more staff. I got tired of doing work and then finding out the insurance company was only going to pay half of my bill, and the patients getting mad at me because they thought that, it was this whole negative thing. And I said, if I have to dig ditches, I'll dig ditches before I do insurance again.
Wow, that's drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah, I just wouldn't. So when John retired, he had told me that year that he was probably going to retire. So I opened a practice in Kaysville, Utah, which was, I had to sign a non-compete clause of about 20-mile radius for my practice. So I opened up in Kaysville, Utah. It's a small practice. I have one full-time staff and 3 part-time. And we do
And an associate, I believe.
and an associate.
Yeah.
We do 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. I start at 6:30 in the morning. I've done that ever since I opened my doors. People think, 6:30? Who comes in? That's the busiest time of my day.
I bet a lot of people get up and want to get
They want to get it
forward.
done. They don't want to be worried about an appointment at the end of their day.
Right.
And people come in late because it's just a great way to practice. And so I practice from 6:30 until 4:30, 5 o'clock. It's getting busier now, and I'm booked out through February for new patients.
Wow, so you're calling it a small practice, but here you are. We're mid-January, and you're through February with new patients. So a new patient can't come see you next week if they want to.
Unless I stay after hours, which I do commonly.
Sometimes, yeah.
So my practice grew really fast.
Yeah, and 100% cash. You would take
100% cash.
Love that.
And so I keep my fees low. I charge $45 for an adjustment, and then if we do the muscle work, it's more.
Right.
And people pay cash.
Isn't that great?
It is.
So now also you were written up. Many of you might know Tim Ferriss, who's a fairly well-known guy who's a New York Times bestselling author. He wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, and then from there the spin-offs. So he did the 4-Hour Body, etc. And you were written into the 4-Hour Body. So he was a patient of yours.
Yes.
Did you have any idea he was going to write a book chapter on you?
No, I didn't.
So just to put the thread together. So next thing you know, this book comes out, which is another New York Times bestseller, and he talks about his experience coming to see you as the chiropractor and how great it was and the impact on his life. The result of which is Jeff Hayes reads this book and said, "I got to find this guy Buhler."
Well, he was in Sandy, Utah, which is 20 minutes from my office.
Yeah, and he reads the book. So he comes and finds you. Now, Jeff Hayes, if I think everybody knows, is the filmmaker who produced Doctored, the documentary. So he's a patient in your office, and you happen to know he's a documentary filmmaker, and he said to you he's looking for a new project.
Well, he wasn't really looking for a new project. I'd worked on him for about 6 weeks, and I'm, believe it or not, the delegate for the American Chiropractic Association for my state.
Right.
And so I had been at a convention, and we were dealing with all the political stuff we're dealing with the AMA trying to legislate us out of practice, and the insurance companies telling that they're not going to cover payment for children because there's no research. All this political garbage. And I came back that Monday, and Jeff had an appointment, and he asked me how it went. And I told him just how overwhelming it seemed for chiropractors. And I said, I would have thought that this would have ended with the Wilkes trial. It hasn't. They've just gone underground, and they're still working to try to put us out of business. He said, the Wilkes trial, I've never heard of that. I said, most people didn't, because it was really never published. It was pretty much suppressed by the medical profession. He says, well, tell me about it. So I told him about the Wilkes trial. So the next week he comes in, and he said, I've done research on the Wilkes trial. He said, it's a story that should have been told. It needs to be told. I'm going to do your film.
Wow.
And it was such a shock to me. I mean, he tells people I started crying. Well, I did get tears in my eyes because I realized what that meant.
Right.
It's like I felt, because my whole career I have fought to try to improve the image of chiropractic, and I've been hammered by so many different people in the medical community, and it becomes overwhelming. And I'm not the only one. I mean, you have, and so many of us have. And to realize that the filmmaker was willing to do a documentary film on us.
Right.
After all these years, I mean, I realized the impact that could have, and it was really overwhelming. And Jeff
made the film.
Made the film.
And interestingly, it went places so far beyond Wilk as far as, once he opened up the door, it was almost like you going to ADIO, right? It's like,
it was.
What's going on here?
True.
But
what's interesting is once he decided to do that, it's just like in my life when we're sharing this innate type process.
Right.
It was almost like God says, okay, hang on, because here we go. And he was drawn to people like you. I mean, it was like the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember we were at an ACA convention, and we were filming some of the doctors there. A lot of them never made it into the film.
Right.
And a doctor came up to him and he said, do you think the producer would be interested in some video of the Wilkes interview? I said, what do you mean? He says, yeah, I've got Chester Wilkes gave this doctor the video, and he spent months editing just the jewels,
Right.
and he had that at the convention.
Wow.
And he met with Jeff, and that's where we get the footage of Barrett and all,
Yeah,
all
that whole thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what are the odds of that?
That's where when you're on purpose, things show up like
It's
that.
true.
Don't they?
It's true.
That is just so fantastic. So here's the thing that's really interesting. You're now out there for over 30 years in practice. Amazing journey. One of the things that Jeff Hayes said to me, and this is what I think makes you great and has made you given you the success in your career, is that through the film, I think you met Francis Murphy.
I did.
Who was also featured in the film. Now, Francis has his own technique, kind of his approach towards adjusting occiput. You have the thing that you do. And Jeff was so amazed. I was sitting at lunch with him one time out in Park City, and he said, these two guys, they meet each other, next thing you know, one's flying to the other one's office to learn each other's techniques. And so here you are, still learning, still looking for new and better ways. And you don't have the arrogance of saying, well, I've arrived now, and now I'm the expert, and I just tell people. You're still wanting to learn. You have a hunger to learn, which I just think is awesome. And that's really, I think, the key to success. You keep that almost that neophyte amazement and wonder about the world, about the body, about innate, about chiropractic, about all these things, and you're always looking for new and better ways to improve and deliver the results. And I think, incidentally, that's one of the big keys of cash practice is that if you're focused on delivering results and you bring your A game every day, people will want to pay for that.
You have to have the skill set. You have to have the intentionality to be able to deliver the results.
Yeah.
And people will come.
Yeah.
The problem that I see, Patrick, is that so many of our students are graduating from chiropractic college as exalted physical therapists.
Yeah.
They have no grasp of what chiropractic is. The philosophy drives the system. That's where the miracle happens.
Right.
All the tools we learn, the science, all that helps us direct that.
Right.
But unless we have that, that's why so many chiropractors are going out of business, why they're struggling financially, because they hold on to these concepts that are not it.
Right.
And
you know what? It's so, what you just said, and I think that is a powerful statement. The philosophy drives the system. You have a system of technique that you pulled together, but how is that assembled? The philosophy drives the system. Now my understanding from the context of chiropractic, from the context of innate, from the context of vitalism and the nervous system, that drives how the system is delivered.
Yeah, exactly true.
And that's a powerful statement. So I had the pleasure of having you work on me, and one of the things that it's funny because when you get into your system, there's a lexicon that emerges amongst your patients, and I hear them like Joe Mercola, who was also a patient of yours, who you did work on, and other really pretty big luminaries who have access to any care they want, and they're coming to get what you've got. But basically, you identify what you refer to as muscles being shut off.
Correct.
So when you go through your testing system, what you're saying is, there's a certain, I guess, balance of muscle tone, and D.D. Palmer said chiropractic's found in the concept of tone. Well, that's everywhere in the system, not
True.
just one place. And you say that you find muscles that are shut down, so the balance of the tone is not there anymore in the muscle. So can you talk maybe just for a minute or two about how what are the implications of that, and how do you approach it?
Well, as we go through life, we have one injury on top of another on top of another. Mm-hmm. And if all the essential components for healing are available, the body heals it. Mm-hmm. Total resolution. Mm-hmm. But what we find is most people don't have all the essential components, whether it's nutritional, nerve supply, acupuncture flow, all those things that go into the mix. So the body's forced to adapt around that. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing diseases of adaptation. Mm-hmm. And you talk about that, and so many other people talk about that. But what we discovered is if a muscle's overloaded beyond its ability to handle the stress, one or two things happen. You either tear the tissue and or the proprioceptive system inhibits the muscle to protect it. Mm-hmm. From that point on, the muscle will fire into passive range of motion, but if you load it, it gives way. That's what the muscle test exposes. Mm-hmm. If that problem is not solved within 6 weeks, the central nervous system is forced to adapt into other tissues. Mm-hmm. And that's when things start to get more difficult, especially in your assessment. So if you successfully adapt into other tissues, then your symptoms may go away. You say,
Right.
oh, I'm better.
Right.
But that adaptation might mean that that tissue is taking on more stress than it should, and that may be the next site of injury. So we go from one injury to the next to the next.
Right.
So we talk about the spindle cells, which if they're stimulated, they facilitate the muscle. They contract to try to produce stability. The body does everything it can to produce stability. That's key.
Right.
And so then if those cells are stressed, the muscle tries to contract to stabilize, but if it exceeds that integrity, then the Golgi tendon apparatus kicks in and inhibits the muscle. But if the trauma is more severe, too rapid, to where the central nervous system can't react, then the attachments, the enthesis of the periosteum of the bone through the little Sharpie's fibers is the fail-safe, and that thing shuts the muscle down. And that's when the muscle won't fire under load. Now, if you keep loading the muscle, you'll get pain at the attachments because body, innate, is saying, hey, I can't support this. You need to back off.
Right.
Okay? So the interesting thing that we discovered years ago, and this shifted the whole paradigm. If we think about Sherrington's law of reciprocal innovation, if a muscle contracts, it inhibits its antagonist.
Right.
So like in Carlos Boozer's case, Carlos had this chronic hamstring problem. Everyone was treating hamstring. He'd go back out and start working out again, he'd tear it again. Go through the rehab, back out, tear it again. So when I saw him, I asked him to bend down and touch the floor. He could go down and touch the mid part of his shins before he had severe pain. That's how tight he was. So I evaluated him. I found all of his quadriceps shut down. And I found hamstrings were functional. So I cleared the quads. He got off the table, this is an hour later, gets off the table. I ask him to bend down. He goes down, puts both hands flat on the floor.
Wow.
No pain.
Wow. What was
He
his
was
reaction?
shocked. I mean, he was shocked.
Yeah.
It's like, what? But see, that's the dynamics of the central nervous system. And so if we're treating tight muscles, we're treating the adaptation.
Right.
So you got to look at, okay, why is the muscle tight? Why does the muscle facilitate? It does it to protect.
Right.
So if you're restricted through internal hip rotation, you say, well, your externals are tight, which they are.
Right.
But the truth is your internal rotators are proprioceptively inhibited.
Right.
And they don't fire.
So then they seem tight because they don't have the counterbalancing tone.
And so if you reactivate that internal rotator, your range of motion normalizes, which means the externals just released without treating the external rotators.
Right. Now this process can be involved because, as you said, this kind of gets layered over time.
It is.
So you start peeling the onion, I guess, as far as trying to get back down to, the root causes where this whole chain reaction started.
Correct.
And the longer that you've lived with this, I imagine, the more layers are on top of it,
Correct.
compensating. So fascinating, and obviously, it makes a lot of sense, and the proof is in the pudding, looking at the results you've been getting for all these years.
Right.
And the people who seek you out, because of what you do. But I'll also say that it's not like you're, the great and all-knowing Oz behind the curtain. This is something that you can teach, and that
Yes.
and that you are teaching now. So if somebody wanted to learn your technique, how do they do it? What's the process?
They go to my website at amitmethod.com.
So spell that just so
AMIT.
amitmethod.com. Okay.
And there's information there. There's videos. There's my schedule for seminars. And what's been really neat is that 95% of the doctors that have taken my work, their practices have doubled.
And that's 95%.
Yeah.
Wow. And because they're delivering results now that they never could before.
They like kids at Christmas time. Because patients come in, they get results like iliotibial band syndrome,
All right.
fixed.
Wow.
Osgood Slaughters, shin splints, sprained ankles. I mean, they're just like, wow, the body can heal that fast? Yes.
Wow.
It
So
can.
how long? So if somebody comes in, who's a chiropractor's got the basic chiropractic foundation, how long do they need to train with you before they're ready to start putting stuff on the ground?
9 months.
9 months. So basically, if they started today, 9 months from now they'd be able to start.
They come in one weekend a month, and it's modular. So we set the foundation, and then we do the knee, pelvis, we do the lower extremities, feet, the shoulders, and so it's modular.
Right. And do you bring toggle in? Do you have to teach them that whole process?
Toggle is the foundation.
Okay.
The foundation is making sure the central nervous system is clear.
Right.
And then we look at adaptations, and we make sure that we've cleared, because the body will adapt through cross-crawl patterns and such.
Mm-hmm.
We look at that to make sure that that's online, and there's a whole series of reflexes to bring that online.
Right.
Oftentimes you'll see people come in, they'll be complaining of pain in the left shoulder, and their history indicates they separated the right shoulder years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but the pain went away and it doesn't bother them, but the other one does.
Right.
They've just shifted. It's like their energy field shifts, and they adapt in the opposite side, and so it's like shadow image. You treat the left shoulder, it never gets better,
Right.
because the problem's in the right shoulder.
Right.
So if you clear these reflexes within 24 hours, the symptoms shift from the left shoulder back to the right, which now matches their history.
Right.
So if the history doesn't match what you're finding in the exam, they're adapted.
Right. And that's when you have to start your
It's the understanding
process.
how that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
You can lead through that process and know
Yeah.
exactly what you need to do, make the shift. Now you're treating the core cause.
And the logic is there. I mean, and so it's once you get the context,
Yes.
then you just start using your brain and what your understanding is.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah.
plug all your other techniques into it, and it just adds to the whole mix.
Wow, that's so great. Well, for the people who are listening to this, obviously, I highly recommend Dr. Buhler's approach and technique because I've experienced it myself, and as with so many others, and it's unique. It's a wonderful approach. It's something that is, again, it's how'd you put it? Philosophy drives the system of it. And but there's these cases that might have your head scratching today, but just learning how to do it from his context, suddenly now you have a whole new tool in your kit to get better results with your people. And you know how I'm advocating: get off of insurance, deliver high-level results that they can't get anywhere else, and you'll get paid very well. You'll have a lot more fun. You'll get better results, and the world's a better place.
Absolutely.
So I just want to first of all say, Craig, thanks so much for taking time out and sitting and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you.
And again, it's for the website. Say it for me one more time.
AMITmethod.com.
AMITmethod.com. Go there, get information, let your friends know about it. I really just think that Dr. Buhler is one of the treasures of our profession and has done decades of work trying to improve upon how chiropractors can deliver great results to their patients. So again, thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time I'm out in the Park City area in Utah. And maybe we can have an updated conversation sometime in the future.
Great. Thank you.
So for everybody listening, thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Dr. Craig Buhler out here live with us live to us, record to you out here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Everybody have a great 2013.